Hello, everyone, and welcome to this weekly webinar produced by Business Performance USA. We're so glad to have you in our listening audience today, and we are glad to welcome you as our guests. Today, our webinar, as you can see, is Walk Your Walk. I'm Cynthia Stewart, Managing Partner with Evermore Services, your partner in building tomorrow's businesses today. I will be your host for this hour. I've also invited Victor Dominguez to join us as a co-host and commentator for today. Welcome, Victor. We
Thank
appreciate
you,
you
Cynthia.
joining us.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Your executive presenter today is Dr. Jeff Stewart. He's agent for Board of Trustees, Board of Directors, and CXOs teams, and first speaker in his company is JAS LLC. Dr. Stewart has been serving Fortune 10, 100, and 1000 firms for more than 30 years by focusing top leaders on the critical dimensions of core intellectual properties and on timing rapid market entries for their emerging businesses. His career to date in terms of economic value is in the range of 14 figures. Dr. Stewart serves as a chairman emeritus of the National Advisory Council for the American Society for Competitiveness. For 50 plus years, Jeff has been serving as an ordained elder and also 30 plus years as for his faith communities, as well as a loyal eagle of the Boy Scouts of America. We want to make sure this hour is well worth your time. So we encourage you to send your questions using the chat feature, and we'll see that those get answered as time allows. Also, we'll ask you to participate at various stages. So listen up, and we'll be sure that you get a chance to interact with Dr. Jeff. If you have any specific questions about a situation at your workplace, you may email that to victor@businessperformanceusa.org. This webinar is being recorded and may be viewed at a later date, so watch for Jeff's white paper, case studies, and other papers on this topic. Just visit the website at businessperformanceusa.org to find the webinar recording and other information. All right, so let's get started, Jeff. We're ready for you to begin.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm here to talk about walking your walk. Um, it seems a little bit odd to say it like that, but it's very often that we do webinars and we talk our talk. And sometimes we talk about walking our talk, and sometimes we actually talk about talking the walk. But frequently we don't focus on the path, on the steps we take day in and day out. And especially, we don't focus on them in the you context. Somebody's usually telling us what to do, or we're telling somebody else what to do, or others are telling a bunch of us what to do. Frequently, we forget that the strongest motive of all to accomplish anything comes from within. It's what we call the intrinsic motive, the thing that drives results into places where they stick and stay for long periods of time. That could be in a workplace, it could be in relationships, it could be in institutional life. But the fact is, walking your walk is the way we get there. So let me ask you, how do you, in your business, build sustainable operational excellence? How do you build sustainable operational excellence? Well, I've taken the opportunity to spell it out in front of us so that we could think about it later when we're finished talking. But I wanted to bring it up in front so that we would have a frame of reference that is like, if this, if that, then what? So the first if is when your workforces become engaged with constantly adding value for each other as well as for your clientele, with focusing their work culture continuously on results, that focus becomes a powerful, shareable source of joy in their lives. So that's a big if. Do your workforces get that engaged? Are they constantly adding value for each other as well as your clients? Does the focus they put into their culture, the organizational life, have continuity? Is it continuous enough and results centered to become a truly powerful, shareable source of joy? Do people come to work and leave work with their lives fuller and richer and feeling more, as they say in the Midwest, blessed? Second big if. When your workforces actually enjoy working together, when they join forces to get work done, do they actually sustain their competitive edge? Or do they end up being distracted by their own interactions? So I would presume that if they can sustain their competitive edge, that they begin to develop eagerly and ever more deliberately what we would call an adaptive, resilient mindset. They become devoted to organizational excellence, thus making operational excellence truly sustainable. So that's the second big if. We have two big ifs. One, do people become engaged enough to find joy in their working lives and lives in general? And two, working together, are they committed to sustaining a competitive edge and deliberately adapting and becoming more resilient as they go? If they are, then organizational excellence occurs and operational excellence becomes sustainable. What's the trick? Well,
Jeff,
the trick in the end, yeah, go ahead, Victor.
I'll throw in a quick comment there, a little Boolean logic, if you will, and just say the same thing but slice it from a different angle. The uh, the if and then the if for me begins with if employees learn to serve each other, then they are ready to serve the customer. And it's a simple dialogue that people do understand. But the service of a company obviously is critical to the customer retention and experience, but it has to begin inside, and service begins with one employee serving another in that value chain. And that's a simple description we use in our business for keeping everyone engaged. And the other term I use for engaged is simply involved. Are you involved in the business, and not just what you do, but with what happens before you and then what happens after you in that value chain?
That's very good, Victor. I really appreciate that because you've pointed out before how operational excellence is the key to a brand. And that engagement is what I'm addressing in the broad experience of brand in the first big if. The second big if is in and around the word you chose, involving, because to be fully involved means you're worth it in the competition. You get completely engaged in giving birth to value, in creating and sowing the seeds of future value, and in essence, building something that'll last. We've chosen the word sustainable because it implies many things that are more common in our culture today that people can relate to and frequently tend to try to pigeonhole in a small box. But sustainability is neither just about response to crisis or preparation. It's not just about saving bucks and making business to business valuable while we make our environment better. It's also about relationships, and it's also about internal motive. So when I click through to the next point, it really is that walking your walk is the key. Walking your walk becomes really like a genome, the economic value creating genome. It's the double helix of free enterprise. your ideal experience is waiting. It's there all the time. So if you're walking your walk, my contention is that your ideal experience constantly meets you in the real world. That experience could be you being reflected in the eyes and the satisfaction of your customer. It could be you being reflected in the eyes and the satisfaction of your coworkers. It could be you meeting the optimal response from your organizational structure and your leadership outside of your own world of expertise. In essence, your experience will be as ideal as you deliberately make it. And as you work together with others in those deliberations, you'll be lighting up your pathway as you go forward. That's the use of intelligence. You know, it's real important to realize that if you put one foot in front of another, as it were, and walk down the path of life, what makes a difference is the fact that you can keep your eye on the mountaintop. As you go, what you see ahead of you actually lights the path in front of you. Now, I know that sounds kind of poetic, but in effect, it's poetic justice. Judgment of value in the market comes by keeping your eye on the goal. And when you reach for that goal, that big old goal out there ahead of you, the organizational goal, you actually achieve one objective after another almost without thinking. That's where the character of leadership fits in. And in essence, I'm calling that the economic value creating genome. It's a double helix. It's got the DNA and the RNA working for you, and that means your enterprise has a chance to be actually a freeing, liberating experience. So I'd like to move on. How does this happen? If we have operating excellence and organizational excellence, how do these things work together? Now, I would like to point out for housekeeping purposes that in this particular graph, and it is a graph, not just a chart, that I use the word organization and the word cultural um, interchangeably for the moment. Um, there are conversations that could be had that would make some pretty good semantic differentials there, but I'd like to just leave it as a synonym for the day. Organizational excellence and cultural excellence will, for this discussion today, be essentially the same. So what I'm positing and putting out there based upon long experience and many cycles of learning, many product and service life cycles, many new ideas put into operation and replaced again when they were outworn or outmoded, is that organizational excellence is primarily a function of time, and that operational excellence is primarily a function of the hurdles we face as we run the race around the track of business. So in doing that, I'm saying that the subject matter or technical hurdles at the top and business process hurdles and cultural hurdles stand in relationship to each other the same way time stands in relationship to our experience and the world around us. So I've written in the vertical column words that we most normally don't associate with time, but that actually say a lot about the nature of time as we experience it. Those words are speed, control, and discipline. Speed is quite literally a flat time. It's a rate at which things move. So if I'm moving liquid at 30 fluid ounces per minute, which is not very much, then that is speed. If I'm moving it at 30 or 50 or sometimes 100 and then I drop back to 40, that is acceleration. That is to say, we move faster, we move more at a faster rate, and we move less at a slower rate. That's called control. In our common speech, then, the first two kinds of time we deal with are speed and control. The last one I'll come back to in a few minutes, but I just want to mention the word right now. That's discipline. And I've used a word which is a little uncommon, You've heard the word synchronicity, or something is synchronized. What I'm dealing with is the idea that time itself is a synchrony. Time is like a symphony orchestra that focuses on sound. Time works by analogy the way a symphony works. There's an orchestration to time that takes great discipline, not only among the individual members of the orchestrated group, but also as they work in teams under the direction of a superior conductor. So discipline is the idea of time at its fullest in human experience. Speed, control, and discipline. And for those of you that are more given to the sciences and math, think of it as velocity, acceleration, and synchrony. All right, now I've gone through a whole lot of words to try to explain a basic framework. If that were all it were, it would kind of be just a chart, and we'd be looking at, how these things sort of fit together. Subjects and speed, or technical aspects and speed, control and business processes and discipline and our organizational cultures. As a matter of fact, we do that a lot. We think of life as kind of charted out in front of us. We like to have things pigeonholed, but we don't always think of the functionality involved moving from one aspect of our view of life from one pigeonhole to another. And that's what I'm trying to depict here. If you understand that much, then what you'll understand is that I'm assigning a relative value called an order of magnitude difference to the different aspects of value creation, whether they're on the time axis or the hurdle axis. I'm saying that speed and technical matters have a value of 1. Well, if you think about that in the marketplace, what the heck does that mean? Well, I order 1 widget and I expect it in 1 day. I get 1 widget in 1 day and I'm happy. But, there's not a whole lot of value in that except for the delivery people. I have a very thin margin, have to push a lot of widgets at one-on-one in order to get away with any profitability at all. In fact, I'd probably just as soon source it from somebody and own the distribution chain. By the way, there are a lot of companies from outside the United States who don't understand the way we think about doing business, but who've discovered that there's a whole lot of money to be made in distribution chains. So one of the first things they do in the United States is strip away the franchise issues, bring in their own culture, which is typically non-union, and what they do is instead create a one-on-one trade-off where they buy a foothold in the U.S. economy and own distribution chains. And then by shrinking back this, that, and the other thing, gaining efficiencies and improving some of the effectiveness on new ideas, they become enormously profitable and become a part of our first world economy, even if they're not first world countries or have their home offices in first world countries. So there is pretty good value on the import side for those who just focus on speed and on technology or subject matter areas where expertise matters. The way you begin to grow in value, though, is understanding the business process itself. And we in America understand that. In America, I mean North America and all of our trading partners. The American dream made real is we focus on business process. We focus on minding our business, on making sure the processes get better. And typically, by improving our processes, we gain in efficiency. The only problem with that is by focusing solely on efficiencies, the effectiveness of what we're doing is pushed way out in front of us and doesn't get accounted for in the short term, on the quarterlies and on the semi-annuals, and even in the annual reports, it's barely dealt with. The way we get there is to look at time to market and time to money. They're almost synonyms, kind of like the way I use organization and culture. Time to market means, do we get there when the window's open, and do we get there early enough to benefit from the surge of interest in whatever the customers want? So, the faster I can get there within limits, I don't want to get there so fast I crash against a closed window. And, I don't want to get there when the window's wide open and stuck, because then I can't get out. The point is, if I get there with some control based upon historically what clients or customers have wanted in specific kinds of markets, for example, tennis shoes in a world of runners, then I stand to make good money even if it's just an improvement on a well-known product. So this usually has a value of an order of magnitude difference over speed where control is concerned. Just like business process has the same order of magnitude shift in value over a technical or subject matter expertise. So we work with business process to really get and control to really get what would look like, in this case, a 100x return. How do you justify that? Well, if you go to a public stock market like the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ or any one of those around the world, control and reliability play largely into what people want to buy. You're commonly told, if you're an investor, don't invest in things you don't understand, which means that you have a history with them and you can control what you do there pretty easily. You bet on the business process of somebody who's better at it than you would be, and you don't want to do the work anyway, and so you want that 10x on your 10x. That's a 100x return. So you're willing to buy at a value over the actual cost and over the net present value of a business in the market. And that's called your market capitalization. It's your markup, and it'll usually fall in the range of 100x or less, sometimes more. And it's the sometimes more where you begin to see things working very differently. Remember, yeah, Victor, what would you like to say?
Well, sorry for the interruption, but this is what I'm thinking about here is my introduction into the business world following, quote, higher education and everything I've learned since then, which has sort of dismantled much of those trainings. I used to place speed as number one, the most speed to market specifically, because that falls into my discipline. But in managing speed to market was almost everything to get a product service out there quicker, faster, ahead of the competition. And that control was traditionally actually an impediment to that, because I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. I've been in that seat, and there's sort of a ready, shoot, aim mentality with people that see control as an enemy and inhibits velocity. But what's fascinating is this this talk you're giving completely reverses the order and reverses that logic. So going to the notion of control as in command and control, as in gathering data and segregating that data from the workforce and processing it and reissuing it back to the workforce with interpretations. That's actually not at all what you're talking about. Is that correct?
That's correct. Let me make a footnote, though. The question of command and control is one that's real, not just in legacy organizations, but it needs to be addressed because there are extreme circumstances where command and control is important. For example, in response to a natural crisis or a catastrophe imposed by any force from without, uh, the ability to take command of the situation and to regulate the flow of information, events, resources, and intentions around that critical moment is something that we have to be prepared to do. So yeah, there's a dimension of command and control. The problem arises when we tend to create an expectation that everything that is urgent is also a crisis or a catastrophe waiting to happen. In that regard, control gets distorted and we fail to understand. So let me shift the analogy a little bit on you and suggest that in the end, I'm going to say discipline comes first, not speed. And that in the middle somewhere, being sure that we're under control, that we're well regulated, comes next. Because if we're really, really disciplined, but we're not really under control, we'll typically leave the race behind, and while we might win well ahead of the pack and gain some kudos, the race and the value of the race to those watching it and investing in the race is severely reduced for the future market. But let me again come back to control. Here's a separate analogy. Uh, I believe, let me just do it straight out. I like to drive fast cars, and particularly when I was younger, I used to drive a Lotus Europa, and I drove that with my stepdad, who did the Southwest Circuit, and he taught me a lot about driving a car. I mean, I knew some of the rules, but I really didn't implement them at high speed. I didn't know how essential they would be as I accelerated in the direction of my motion toward that goal of passing the end of the race with a winning mark. So I couldn't break it down to the actual effect of driving the car. You know, it was all in my head and not in my hands and my feet and my body in the seat of the car. And I'm talking about somebody now who's walking the walk, driving the drive, racing the race, okay? What he taught me is very simple. And I'll bet you that you probably taught it to one of your daughters, or I know I did to one of my children when I was trying to teach them how to drive. And here's what it is. As you approach a curve in the road, and every road's full of curves, as you know, they're not all as straight as this beautiful line across this graph. The curve in the road has to be, as we say, negotiated properly. You slow down a little bit, you size the approach, and as you enter the curve, you accelerate smoothly through the curve until as you exit the curve, your acceleration peaks for the straight out ahead, and you can continue to push until you move past the other folks in the race. Now, that presumes you know your position relative to the other folks entering the curve. It presumes you know your execution is totally under charge and under control as you move through that curve. And it presumes that you have made your presence felt in that space, in that curve, the market opportunity, if you like, with such vigor that those who are not completely where you are in the focused moment will allow you to move through. And honestly, that's what happens because no one wants a wreck in the marketplace. It destroys the value of the race. It might create a lot of sensation and headlines, but it will not do most folks much good at all. So you see, speed and control are two elements of time. And it's the time that we're in a market that matters, and how we are in the market that matters is a function of time as well. And I'm calling that discipline because being able to synchronize our work in an orchestrated world is a matter of great discipline. If we look at the cultural value and you see the order of magnitude boost over process improvement, let's say we get rid of some cultural barriers. Inside an organization, let's say it's been a monoculture, and pick a nationality, pick a racial group, pick an ethnic dominance, or whatever you want. It's been a monoculture. It's been very successful. It's pushed its way to the front, you know, and it's kind of developed a sense of pride in itself that way. But what happens when it hits a truly global world where there's all kinds of monocultures? Well, guess what? They have to become a whole lot more creative culturally, don't they? They have to deal with all those cultural intersections and make decisions in those cultural intersections that change the way they process their business activities and change even the way they view what they do with expertise from a technical point of view. When we go global, for example, we're across multiple time zones. We need all kinds of sophisticated calendaring systems to keep us connected and in communication with people in a timely fashion. If you don't think that matters, think about how many corporations that are global today have manufacturing, servicing, customer centers, and everything else in tens and even hundreds of locations. Just think for a minute of a Walmart. A Walmart is more than a distribution system, although they've really mastered that. Walmart is everywhere. And Walmart does it by using technical expertise in the context of a constantly improving business process that pushes time to money to the very shortest window. They get to money every time something is delivered to the front of a shelf because they know that when they open, It's there for people who are going to want it that day in that place at that time. So they've actually modified not only their culture, but the culture around them. So when we look at culture change and we see a cultural multiple of 100x intersecting with a new discipline on life, a new way of orchestrating and conducting business, we get a 10,000x return. What? Well, it's hard to even think what that might mean without real examples. So I'm going to move to that, but I want to ask you a picture. If you're going to take such a giant step, what's it worth? In other words, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I've put more than 1,000 into this picture, what's a giant step forward worth? Well, let's take a look-see. You break in at any time, please, any one of you who want to comment or ask questions, and I'll be happy to take them. We're going to do away with surveys in this discussion because some of these concepts are counterintuitive, as we say. It's not exactly common sense until you see it, and then suddenly everybody sees it and it becomes common sense. It's a little bit of a 100th monkey syndrome. Um,
Well,
so
that's a good point, Dr. J, because to answer what it's worth, you almost have either had to been through it before uh, to to see it, to do it, to know it. It's hard to extrapolate what these concepts are worth in the very beginning. It's sort of a leap of faith that that you maybe need to abandon some practices you've conducted before or were taught before, and trust that the operational excellence and culture will take you down this path.
well, I think that's well chosen language. You know, the metaphor of a leap of faith implies that when the next foot hits the ground, it's also going to be equally solid. So, you know, when you choose to run a race, you've actually made the first step, which we could call a leap of faith. You either have faith in the market or you don't. If you don't have faith in the market, I will tell you that you shouldn't be in it. If you don't have faith in your fellow people, I will tell you it's time to withdraw and go find faith in people. You know, we have all kinds of communities around the world, monastic and so forth and so on, that allow people to withdraw and find their footing in the human condition. We typically have reserved those for a non-market environment, but increasingly in today's world of global speed and global culture, what we're dealing with is individuals who, in a way, are almost like monastic adherents, devotees of a discipline in action that before we would have withdrawn from the world because we didn't know how to deal with. Now, you know, you may think that's crazy, but let's look at Google, for example. What did Google do? Google put in the mind share of whoever climbs aboard the ability to search the human capacity at its fullest reach. And as Google expands and Facebook comes along with a similar type of approach, what you understand is that the technologies and the subject matter expertises represented by Apple and YouTube in this case engage all together. And the ability to search the collective human imagination, the soul of the world, wow. The individual expertises that pop up on YouTube daily just get posted there by golly knows who's got a camera, and powered up by Apple in a way that brings organizational excellence to the surface, to the degree that today, for example, I noticed that a commentator on the current reorganization of Microsoft said that the new reorg is essentially a move of the old Microsoft organizational structure into the direction of the Apple organizational structure. Microsoft has finally moved, in this commentator's view, in the direction of organizational excellence represented by Apple Corporation. Wonderful. Now,
That's fascinating if you know the history of the two organizations that have
so
at times
so
hated each other.
Google gives us infinite search, and they visualize it at a very high level for almost anybody through YouTube and a variety of other plug-in apps. Apple gives us not only plug-in apps, but a market for those abilities, those little apps that each one of us rely on to get stuff done. And Facebook is adding apps that play off of all those things so that we create a complete social environment. Now, is that social environment less than human just because we're not sitting across from each other after working out like I did this morning, smelling the sweat of the locker room? I don't think so. To be honest with you, most of us go to the locker room, take a shower, dress up, and go meet our friends. What's the difference between that and knowing what you're doing when you climb on Facebook and take care of how you appear to others? You know, you may be more or less relaxed about it, but again, that's individual style. And the point here is that when you join the race, the human race, it's your individual style that surfaces. Now, that's where I bring in the example of LinkedIn. LinkedIn lets you, as a professional, be personal in your approach to others and choose to win on your own terms at a rate and a level which was heretofore unimaginable without mitigation and headhunters in the world at large. Does this do away with the human capital business, the ability to recruit talent and move it into the right slots? No, it actually moves it up to a higher pitch than ever before. You know, if you don't believe me, you got to understand that that's the way technology works. I'm a dinosaur from technology days. I go all the way back to a prototype IBM 360. Yeah, yeah, really. I first did my first program, and there were no training courses, on a prototype IBM 360 at a place called Southern Methodist University many moons ago. And I will tell you that the key to it was the ability of one human to connect to another, given an appropriate respect for the solitude that it takes to focus on results that make a difference for the other person. Yeah, that's what LinkedIn does for us as peer to peer. It lets us get in front of peers. It lets companies formed by peers, large or small or medium sized for that matter, get together and understand that human capital and talent are available on all sides, and if given an opportunity to present itself, will establish a base of values. For example, in LinkedIn, as you enter the race today, they say, well, why don't you recommend a person or give them kudos for this or for that? All they're doing right there is spreading out the coinage, you know, the coinage of the realm. When we recognize that others' claims to their talents have value over time in distributing that method of recognition across a wide base like LinkedIn, it actually comes to represent convertible value on the higher. The human capital becomes reinvested as human assets when people find ways of doing business by means of LinkedIn. I spoke with a gentleman yesterday who's found three pieces of business right off of LinkedIn, and he's sold through those first two pieces of business. The third one's currently closing. By the way, he's been doing it less than a year. And the first two, he has sold over $3 million worth of import-export business, you know, from all over the world into the U.S. market, and he's hardly begun. Now, is his take 3 million? Oh no, he was doing a resell on behalf of somebody else. Get the picture. It is business social, not social as business. That's the difference. LinkedIn is the ground that we run the race on. It's business social. It's our affiliations with people in business that have a personal dimension as well as a professional intent. That's where we go. Now, why do all of these succeed in the market at once? Because they're all different, as I pointed out. They have differentiated against market windows, and yet they work together in this world of social media and increasingly of social economic value creation. So win on your own terms in the new world is the mantra. Don't forget that as an individual or a small business, you're the key. The big picture now is the little picture. Yes, Victor.
I'll just throw in one quick comment about LinkedIn. I agree with everything, and I appreciate those comments. The one caveat is to use LinkedIn as a true relationship development tool, meaning it's critical to know who is in your network and what they do. And my simple rule is if I'm looking at my network and I see a face or I see a name and I don't really truly know that person, then they're not effectively in my network. It's not about collecting names and numbers and likes. It's about an actual relationship and finding ways to make connections, that nexus that exists within that relationship. If you're not
I could,
working on something, talking, collaborating, brainstorming, sharing ideas, then your network just isn't working as hard as it could.
oh, well, it's not working at all, probably. You
Probably.
know, it's like any new or developing market. When you enter the market, you have to create value in the market. In this case, content and voluntarily working in conversation, sharing content dynamically with others is, as you point out, the key to making value grow in a network or a platform like LinkedIn. Uh, you know, uh, I don't believe that LinkedIn will ever be the only version of that kind of business platform. As you know, I believe very strongly in the kind of service organization that Business Performance USA is. It is a voluntary organization with free membership, and it is chartered as, I believe, a C6, which means an association where people engage to do whatever the association is chartered to do. This is not the same as LinkedIn. LinkedIn would benefit from connecting with Business Performance USA, I'm almost certain. But, Business Performance USA will benefit from LinkedIn. Um, I think that the open rates working through a platform like LinkedIn will be, I don't know, anywhere from 3 or 4 to 5 or 6 times as high as they would be on the other social media. And in fact, in some cases, maybe 10 to 20 times as high without even trying to get into the issues of culture, which BPUSA does, or global culture and diversity, which is where we are now. So let me come back from that comment and your well-placed view that working the system to create value is important. And let me say that the big picture is now the little picture, but it's also vice versa. Whatever you do in your locale, whether it's regional or not, we have to be prepared to go back the other way and to reach out. We can scope our business and we can scale it to where we can manage it, but what we have to do is understand what our reach needs to be in order to grow value. So as I move on, the thing to understand is that sometimes the subject matter experts and the small to mid-sized businesses are the same. At least they slip back and forth on each other because free enterprise, that is to say, getting together and working in a free market environment, actually liberates the people themselves from the constraints of unnecessary command and control, and it allows them to cash in part of the value of their human capital in the context of exchanging it for others, trade wise or dollar wise. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is that backs the deal is going to help us overcome what I've called in the past and which you've called in a white paper, I believe, based on conversations with me, since I've been talking about it for 30 years, job obsolescence. That is the tendency that we have in progressive advanced cultures to obsolete jobs as fast as we obsolete styles. So let me move on from that and recognize that the subject matter experts working in small to mid-sized businesses are now the really big deal in the world at large. So capital and assets, what backs up the currencies we use in common as legal tender when we get into market situations? Well, first of all, every market situation is a matter of what economists call value creation. And I like to say the phrase economic value creation because the word economic applies the principles of where we live and breathe and get stuff done directly to another ecology, another place where people live and breathe and get stuff done. When they share the same principles, the values they exchange create further opportunity. In our world today, in order to respond on demand, sort of ad hoc to what other people want with good results, we have to rely on high technology. Think of your iPhone for a minute or any one of the tablets that are out there, and you understand that there's a technology there that's pretty unusual. So how does all of that relate to the question, what backs up the currencies that we use? Well, there's no more silver backing, there's no more gold backing. People still invest in precious metals and jewels and all kinds of assets because there are separate markets and trade environments for all of those things. But they're still sort of reacting, if you like, out of a sense of false urgency, of impending doom, of the foreshadowing of crisis and catastrophe. Think of how many doomsayers and naysayers are out there in any one of the market advice categories, and they make money along the way based on people's fear, not the ability to make a leap of faith, a giant step forward, knowing that the ground will remain firm beneath you as the next foot hits the ground. They lose track of the goal, and they count on the fact that people forget that they lose track of the goal. These doom criers and naysayers, what are we going to do with them? Well, sometimes it's important to have them. They remind us to be wary, to keep our wits about us when we get into a market. They remind us that we should always diversify our risk and calculate risk down and out of our business operations. But what backs up the currency we use to basically gas up the engine of the market? Well, it used to be gold and silver, and before that, all kinds of treasure. But today, there is a very special category out there that has a huge impact, and anybody who's interested can go look it up. In the chart that's in front of you, uh, you see the phrase rare earths. What does that mean? Exoplanets on some other star system? Not really. What it means is a concentration on certain types of elements in the periodic table that are actually much more valuable once they're put to work than gold or silver or platinum or any of those things, which are so essential in creating the switches that drive some of the linking systems that we call circuits in our electronics. Rare earths, one in particular, is used in the screen of an iPhone. It's used in the screens of touchpads. These are special forms of elements that, in the case of the iPhone and the touchpads, basically are clear metals, and they're sensitive to gestures and movements and touch. Very interesting. How did we find out about them? Well, we've known about them for quite a while. They've been in the periodic table for 100 years, most of them, and we just didn't know what to do with them. Let me give you an example of the value and why countries like China, who holds one of the greatest, or the largest and deepest major concentrations of rare earths, is doing so well by it. They hold us hostage against our need to have those rare earths. Us? Who's us? The rest of the world. Okay? Those rare earths, the ones that do well, are now worth as much as 15,000 an ounce or more in this down market. If this was a rapidly growing market, which China would love, let me tell you, because they've got lots of, quote, hard currencies in there now, currencies that represent developed economies. If this was a rapidly growing market to actually meet or exceed by competition where their markets are, those values would be 10x at least the current price. Can you imagine $150,000 an ounce? Okay, let's move on. In reprise, that means presuming that the message is something that you realize everybody from Main Street to the altar in heaven itself needs to understand. When your workforces actually become engaged with constantly adding value for each other as well as for your clientele, focusing your workforce culture continuously on results becomes a very powerful, shareable source of joy in the lives of the workforce itself. This is important That's why China is seeing improving lifestyles, at least for sectors of its own people. When your workforces enjoy collaborating, working together to sustain their own competitive edge, they develop eagerly and ever more deliberately an adaptive and resilient mindset. They learn to trust that the next footfall will land on a reasonable surface, and if it doesn't and they stumble and fall, they'll pick themselves up and finish the race. They become devoted to organizational excellence, to the excellence of their culture, whether it's a microculture or a macroculture. And when that happens, operational excellence becomes what we so glibly call, in politicized terms, sustainable. What that literally means is we can hold the value of that culture high. Sustainable, hold it high. Okay, in the end, walking your walk has become the economic value creating genome for free enterprise. In fact, if you take what I'm saying seriously at any level, in any culture, in any organizational style, walking your walk is the double helix. You got 2 feet on the ground, and each of them moves in a kind of helical reaction as you pick up the pace and enter the race. The ideal experience that you're looking for will constantly meet you, however you present yourself personally and professionally in the real world, as intelligence that is the ability to keep the goal in front of you lights your way forward. Walk your walk. Walking your walk becomes what both Socrates, thousands of years ago, and Greg Bateson, less than 100 years ago, both referred to as a metalogue. That is the ability to know from a higher point of view what the way you are on is worth to you each as you converse down the path. The ancient way is now new again. This is the ancient way that we call the human way. Be glad, enjoy, get aboard, and let's get on with it. Thanks so much, Victor. It's been good to be here today. I hope everything works out for you and the audience. And thank you so much, Cynthia, for hosting this in the background and making sure it runs exceedingly well. And to Roz out there, who's another member of your team, I understand she's engaged on a high-value contract helping people in her financial analytics. Best to Roz as well. I'm looking forward to meeting with you all again in the near future. Thanks. I'm Raf.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Next slide, Jeff.
I am on it.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff. We appreciate your insightful words and instruction. A lot of things to think about in this webinar. We hope that folks that are listening today will come back and look at it. We will have it available for you through our website. We hope that you watch for Jeff's white papers. These are concepts that, in fact, are not necessarily new, but they're not things that people are thinking about today. So we welcome you to engage with us. We do have webinars scheduled on a weekly basis. Our next one that Roz will present is expense budgets. Roz has a way of making the complex world of finance, accounting and finance, easy and simple to learn about and use in your own business. And then the line of significance is coming up. What is the line of significance? It has to do with the idea that if we ensure everyone is aligned and pulling in the same direction, you can certainly achieve success. And then again, back is Victor with Time Measures the Brand. So we hope you stay tuned. Look forward to you participating next week. Bye-bye, everyone.